You are using a public restroom right now, or you have used one today, completely taking for granted the fact that a ceramic bowl will instantly whisk your waste into a hidden underground labyrinth.
But if you were born just a few thousand years ago, answering the call of nature could mean sitting on a cold stone ledge over a roaring river, using a shared sponge on a stick to wipe yourself, or literally throwing your feces out of a window into a muddy street.
The way our ancestors handled their most basic biological need is not just a history of plumbing. It is a shocking, gross, and deeply fascinating story of survival, engineering, and bizarre cultural habits that will change the way you look at your bathroom forever.
We look at the past and imagine grand pharaohs, brilliant philosophers, and noble knights, but we rarely ask the most human question of all: where did they actually go when they had to go? The truth is, for the vast majority of human existence, there was no designated place at all. Early nomadic bands of humans simply walked away from their campsites, found a convenient bush or a patch of soft dirt, and let nature take its course. In a world with a very small population and endless open space, this worked perfectly fine, because the earth naturally processed the waste, and groups moved on before things became dangerous. But everything changed when humans decided to stop moving and build permanent settlements. Suddenly, thousands of people were living stacked on top of each other, and within weeks, the ground beneath their feet became a biological ticking time bomb. Diseases like cholera and dysentery began to wipe out entire villages, forcing early innovators to realize that if they did not figure out a way to manage human waste, their civilizations would collapse before they even started. This brings us to the first massive surprise in the history of sanitation, because the earliest known toilets were not primitive holes in the ground, but surprisingly sophisticated systems built over 5,000 years ago. In places like Scotland, at the ancient Neolithic village of Skara Brae, people built stone huts with indoor latrines connected to a primitive drainage system that used water to flush waste out into the ocean. Imagine that for a moment. While the rest of the world was still using the bushes, a small community on a cold Scottish island had indoor plumbing during the Stone Age.
At the exact same time, across the globe in the Indus Valley Civilization, which is modern-day Pakistan and northwest India, engineers were taking this to a whole new level. They built entire cities where almost every single house had a private, clean toilet made of bricks connected to a massive network of covered street drains.
They even had terracotta pipes that allowed waste to drop from the second floor of a house straight into the sewer system. It was incredibly clean, deeply organized, and highly advanced. But then a massive twist occurs that completely derails human progress. This highly advanced, clean Indus Valley civilization completely vanished, and with it, their incredible knowledge of plumbing was totally lost to the world for thousands of years. Humans essentially forgot how to build clean cities, and instead, subsequent civilizations had to reinvent the wheel from scratch, often with disastrous and disgusting results. As the centuries rolled on, different cultures came up with wildly unique ways to handle the problem. In ancient Egypt, if you were wealthy, you sat on a beautiful limestone seat placed over a box filled with clean sand, which a servant would have to manually empty out into the desert later that day.
If you were poor, you simply used a wooden stool with a hole cut into it, placed over a bucket, or you went down to the banks of the Nile River, which created a massive health hazard, since that same river was the source of drinking water.
Meanwhile, in ancient Mesopotamia, people constructed deep brick pits beneath their homes, creating a vertical drop that kept the smell away from the living quarters, but required manual cleaning when the pit filled up. But none of these cultures compare to the sheer scale, madness, and communal nature of the ancient Roman Empire. The Romans are famous for their roads, their armies, and their architecture, but their public toilets were something out of a modern nightmare. If you walked into a public latrine in ancient Rome, you would not find private stalls or closed doors. Instead, you would walk into a massive open room lined with marble benches containing dozens of holes cut side by side with absolutely no dividers between them. You would sit down directly next to a complete stranger, your shoulders touching theirs, and you would strike up a conversation about politics, the weather, or the local gladiator games.
For the Romans, going to the bathroom was a highly social, everyday event, much like going to a coffee shop or a local pub today. But the social aspect is not even the most shocking part of the Roman bathroom experience. The real horror lies in how they wiped. Since toilet paper would not be widely available for centuries, the Romans used a device called a tersorium.
This was a natural sea sponge attached to the end of a long wooden stick. And here is the twist that makes modern historians cringe. It was not a personal item.
There was only a small bucket of salt water or vinegar sitting on the floor in the middle of the room. And when you were done with your business, you picked up the shared sponge, used it, rinsed it off in the bucket, and left it there for the next person to use. Can you imagine the sheer amount of bacteria and disease spreading through a single sponge used by hundreds of citizens every single day?
This shared sponge is believed to be the primary reason why intestinal parasites and deadly bacteria ran rampant through the Roman population, despite their famous aqueducts and baths. But the danger did not stop at the sponge, because the Roman sewers themselves were inherently terrifying places to visit.
The public toilets were connected to massive underground tunnels, like the famous Cloaca Maxima in Rome, which carried waste directly into the Tiber River. Because these sewers were dark, damp, and packed with decaying organic matter, they produced massive amounts of methane gas. This meant that methane pockets would frequently build up right beneath the toilet seats.
If a stray spark or an open flame from a torch got too close, the gas would ignite, causing the marble toilet seats to literally explode into shards of stone while people were sitting on them. Furthermore, because the sewers were wide open to the river, giant rats, crabs, and even venomous snakes would regularly crawl up through the pipes and bite unsuspecting citizens on their bare skin. Going to the bathroom in Rome was so genuinely terrifying that archaeologists have found ancient graffiti on the walls begging the gods for protection, and many people wore good luck charms specifically designed to keep them safe from bathroom demons and explosions. This leads us to another incredible twist. While the Western world was struggling with exploding toilets and shared sponges, the ancient Chinese were moving in a completely different, highly practical direction. Instead of trying to wash the waste away into rivers, they realized that human waste was an incredibly valuable resource. They invented the pig toilet. This was a brilliant, if slightly disturbing, design, where a private latrine was built on a raised platform directly above a pigsty. When a human used the toilet, the waste would fall straight down into the pen below, where it was immediately consumed by the pigs. The pig manure, mixed with the human waste, was then collected and used as a highly potent fertilizer for crops. This created a perfect closed-loop agricultural system that sustained Chinese farming for generations, though it certainly changes how we think about ancient pork production. Around the exact same time, during the Han Dynasty, China also invented the world's very first recognizable version of toilet paper. At first, it was made from rough hemp material and used only by the ultra-wealthy or royalty. By the time the Ming Dynasty arrived, the imperial court was ordering hundreds of thousands of sheets of soft, perfumed, fabric-like paper specifically for the emperor's family.
But while China was enjoying this clean, efficient luxury, Europe was about to plunge into a dark age of sanitation that would last for nearly 1,000 years. When the Roman Empire collapsed, their grand aqueducts fell into ruin, their sewer systems clogged up, and the knowledge of large-scale plumbing vanished from Europe. During the medieval period, cities grew rapidly, but infrastructure did not. If you were an average peasant living in a medieval town, you did not have a toilet, a sewer, or a pigsty. You had a chamber pot. This was a simple metal, ceramic, or wooden bowl that you kept under your bed at night. When you woke up in the morning and found the pot filled to the brim, you did not walk down to a public sewer. Instead, you walked over to your second-story window, opened it up, shouted a warning like "Look out below" to the people walking on the street, and dumped the raw sewage directly onto the cobblestones. The streets of medieval cities were literal open rivers of human waste, animal manure, and rotting garbage. Pedestrians had to wear special high-heeled wooden shoes just to walk through the muck without getting their feet soaked in filth. This is actually where the traditional custom of a gentleman walking on the street side of the sidewalk comes from.
It was an attempt to shield the lady from the splashes of passing carts hitting the liquid waste of the gutters. The smell in these cities was so incredibly overpowering that people carried small bouquets of flowers or spices, called pomanders, close to their noses just to avoid fainting while walking to market. But surely things were better for the rich and powerful living in grand stone castles, right? Well, this is where we encounter another fascinating twist. Castle toilets, known as garderobes, were slightly more advanced but incredibly cold and uncomfortable. A garderobe was a small, cramped room built into the outer wall of the castle, featuring a simple wooden or stone bench with a hole. The twist here is that this hole did not lead to a hidden pipe. It opened up directly to the outside air. When a king or a knight used the toilet, their waste would plummet hundreds of feet down the side of the castle wall, splashing directly into the castle moat below. This meant that the picturesque, beautiful moats we see in fantasy movies today were actually stagnant, green pools of rotting sewage that smelled so horrific they acted as a biological deterrent to invading armies.
But the garderobe had an even stranger use. Medieval people noticed that the heavy ammonia fumes rising up from the sewage hole were incredibly effective at killing bugs. Because of this, noblemen would actually hang their expensive silk and wool clothing inside the toilet rooms to prevent moths and fleas from destroying their garments. Imagine wearing a royal robe that had been marinating in toilet fumes for a week just to keep the bugs away. Furthermore, these castle toilets actually became a major military vulnerability. During the siege of Château Gaillard in France in the year 1204, a small group of invading soldiers realized they could not breach the heavy castle walls or the front gates. Instead, they found the exit hole of the castle garderobe at the base of the wall. One by one, these soldiers crawled up through the filthy, waste-covered chute, squeezed through the toilet hole, entered the castle undetected, and opened the gates for their army. It was one of the most successful and undoubtedly the most disgusting military maneuvers in human history. As the medieval period gave way to the Renaissance, things in Europe somehow managed to get even worse before they got better. Royal palaces grew larger, but they still lacked plumbing. The famous Palace of Versailles in France, housing thousands of aristocrats and servants, had almost no functional toilets.
King Louis XIV and his courtiers would routinely relieve themselves behind curtains, in dark hallways, or out in the beautiful royal gardens because there was simply nowhere else to go.
The grand halls of Versailles constantly smelled of human waste, requiring servants to frequently pack up the entire court and move to a different palace just so the previous one could be scrubbed and aired out for weeks. But just when it seemed like humanity would never escape the filth, a brilliant invention emerged that should have changed everything, but it was completely ignored. In 1596, a man named Sir John Harington, who was the godson of Queen Elizabeth I, invented the very first modern flush toilet. It featured a water tank, a valve, and a mechanism to wash waste away into a cesspool. He even installed one for the Queen in her palace. But here is the massive twist. The invention was a total flop. People thought it was a ridiculous, expensive gimmick, and because there was no widespread sewer system to support it, the toilet smelled terrible because sewer gases would travel right back up the pipe into the room. The invention was completely forgotten, and humanity spent another 200 years dumping waste into buckets and streets. It was not until the mid-1800s, during the Industrial Revolution, that the crisis reached a breaking point. Cities like London grew to sizes never before seen in human history, with millions of people packed into tiny spaces. Every single home used a cesspool beneath their floorboards, which routinely leaked into the local groundwater. This culminated in the year 1858, an event known to history as the Great Stink of London. The weather that summer was unusually hot, causing the heavily polluted River Thames to literally boil with raw sewage. The stench was so incredibly powerful that it brought the entire city to a complete halt. Parliament had to cancel its sessions, courtrooms shut down, and people were vomiting in the streets from the sheer intensity of the smell. The Great Stink finally forced politicians to realize that sanitation was a matter of national survival. They hired a brilliant engineer named Joseph Bazalgette, who constructed a massive, revolutionary underground sewer network across London that completely changed the modern world. At the exact same time, innovators finally solved the smell problem of the flush toilet by inventing the S-trap, a simple curved pipe that keeps a small amount of clean water inside the bowl, acting as a physical barrier that blocks sewer gases from rising into the house.
With a functional sewer system and a smell-free toilet design, the modern bathroom was finally born, rapidly spreading across the globe and saving billions of lives from deadly waterborne diseases. We went from shared Roman sponges, exploding marble benches, and open medieval streets to a world of absolute comfort, cleanliness, and privacy.
The next time you walk into your bathroom and press that little silver lever, take a second to appreciate the thousands of years of trial, error, filth, and brilliant engineering that allowed you to wash your troubles away in total peace.